Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today, I'll bring you the next part of the story about LyTuDiep and James. In the previous episode, you probably remember, James's agricultural warehouse was suddenly set on fire by an unknown culprit in the middle of the night. Thick black smoke curled up into the sky, and the blazing flames painted the night red. The entire company fell into chaos. Employees hurriedly called the fire department, while James rushed to the scene with a pale, anxious face. Luckily, the fire was contained in time before it could cause serious damage. But the incident left everyone in shock, because clearly, this wasn't just an accident. Immediately after, James reported the case to the police and ordered a full inspection of the surveillance system, sensing that something suspicious was going on. From that night on, no one at DJ Agriculture could sleep peacefully. James remained silent through the morning, his eyes filled with worry and determination. Meanwhile, Diep tried her best to reassure the staff, though deep down, she couldn't hide her fear either. Stay tuned for today's video to find out what happens next in their story. The next morning, a thin layer of mist still clung to the smoke-stained tin roof. Tiny droplets gathered and rolled slowly down the blackened grooves, leaving behind streaks like unhealed wounds. The whole warehouse area still reeked of burnt plastic, ash, and half-charred wood, blended with the damp smell of earth after the rain, forming a heavy, suffocating scent that made anyone entering instinctively frown. At the gate, the police car was still there, its red and blue lights flashing weakly against the muddy ground. Tire tracks pressed deep into the wet soil, crisscrossed with footprints from firefighters and investigators. The soft squelching of mud under boots mixed with the clicking of cameras as they captured every charred corner, every wall blackened by fire. The air was cold and weary, as if the entire morning had forgotten what warmth felt like. James and Diep stood silently in a corner of the yard, near the only row of storage rooms left untouched. They said nothing, just watched as the officers carefully collected debris, covering half-burned crates with tarps. Each time a damaged shipment was carried out, James felt a stab in his chest. It wasn't just merchandise, it was effort, it was time, it was every ounce of faith they had poured into this company. Reports were written line by line, neat and precise, each word dry and emotionless, yet every stroke seemed to weigh heavier on the heart. No one spoke. Only the wind whistled through the warped metal sheets, carrying traces of smoke that made Diep shiver. She reached out and gently touched James's hand, her eyes filled with worry, though she said nothing. James just stood there, staring at the main warehouse, as if engraving every remaining detail into his memory, determined never to forget. Though everything had grown quiet, the heaviness in their chests remained. The only sound was the slow dripping of water from the roof, tick, tick, into a muddy puddle below. Then, a police officer approached, speaking in a calm but firm voice. "This afternoon, Mr. James, please come to the station to give your final statement." James nodded, his voice hoarse and low, as though it had been buried under hours of silence. "I understand." That afternoon, the sky turned gray and dull, clouds hanging so low they seemed to brush the rooftops. The police station felt unusually quiet. James sat alone in a wide room, its walls stained with age, a rusty ceiling fan creaking rhythmically above. On the table sat a cup of tea, long gone cold, only a faint bitterness lingering on his tongue. The metallic clank of the door echoed. Two officers escorted a man inside. He was small, frail, with greasy, unkempt hair sticking to his sweaty forehead. His eyes were dull and glassy, like someone who hadn't slept in days, or had lived too long in the haze of alcohol and smoke. The stench of liquor mixed with gasoline filled the room as he was pushed into the chair across from James. The investigator flipped open a file, turning a few pages before speaking in a flat tone. "This is the arson suspect. A vagrant addict who's been wandering around the industrial zone. He confessed, someone hired him. James slowly lifted his head. His gaze met the man's, not with anger, but with exhaustion so deep it hollowed his eyes. All he felt was emptiness. A cold disbelief that the ruin of everything he'd built came from someone so pitiful, trembling hands, fearful eyes, and nothing else. The man lowered his head, fingers intertwined and shaking as he muttered, voice breaking. I didn't mean to. They paid me, told me to pour gasoline and light it. He said it was just to scare them. I didn't think it'd really burn. His words came out in fragments, uneven and frail, echoing through the bare room. No one replied. Only the faint scratching of a pen signing the report, the wind whistling through the cracks in the window. And a single, quiet sigh, heavy enough to fill the room with sorrow. The interrogation dragged on in an air so heavy it seemed to crush the breath from their lungs. Above them, the old ceiling fan turned sluggishly, creaking in a slow, tired rhythm, blending with the scratch of the investigator's pen across paper. The dim yellow light from the ceiling lamp cast a pale hue over every face in the narrow room. Who was it? James asked, his voice low and hoarse. He spoke slowly, each word deliberate, but beneath that calm tone lay a deep restraint. No anger. No shouting. Just a question dropped heavily, like a stone hitting still water. The man across from him hunched his shoulders, his eyes wandering somewhere into the darkness behind James's back. For a long, suffocating silence, he said nothing. His thin, dry fingers tapped against the wooden table, dirty nails scraping faint marks onto the old surface. The air was thick with the stench of stale smoke, sweat, and damp paper, dense enough to feel like fog. No one spoke. Only the wall clock ticked on, tick, tack, tick, tack. Then, the man finally lifted his head. His clouded eyes flickered weakly as he muttered. I don't know much. Just that he used to work for your father, back at the old company. 1 second. 2. 3. No one moved. The air froze. Then the name slipped out, quiet, but enough to make everyone in the room glance at each other in shock. Even the investigator hesitated for a beat, his brows knitting briefly before he bent down to the thick file in front of him. He flipped a few pages, reading in a steady, matter-of-fact tone. The suspect has made a clear statement. The man he mentioned used to work under Mr. James's father, in charge of warehouse management. He was dismissed years ago after being caught falsifying inventory and stealing company goods. Since then, he's drifted around the industrial zone, doing odd jobs to survive, but harboring deep resentment. When he heard that the director's son, you, had been promoted and later left to start your own company, he grew bitter. He reportedly mocked you, saying, "That spoiled rich kid won't amount to anything without his father's backing." The officer paused, then looked up at James. When he saw DJ Agriculture growing fast and landing big contracts, that bitterness turned to hatred. Eventually, he paid someone to set the fire, out of revenge. James sat still, staring at the tabletop. His eyelids trembled slightly. His throat burned dry, as if he had swallowed ash. The image of that man surfaced in his mind, the familiar frame, the rough laugh, the firm handshake on the day James left the old company. He remembered clearly, the man had said, "Take care of yourself, young boss. Come back and visit us when you succeed." Someone who once called him young boss with respect, had now burnt his dream to ashes out of envy. James closed his eyes. There was no rage, no hatred, only a deep, aching sadness. Sadness for human hearts, for how small grievances could grow into something that consumed all reason. He took a slow breath, trying to steady himself amid the lingering haze of smoke. Every confession, every line written in that report felt like a blade, sinking slowly, deliberately into his heart. Not because of the loss of property, but because he realized, once trust is betrayed, some things can never be mended again. When the truth was finally laid bare, the instigator was led out in handcuffs. The metallic clink of chains echoed harshly down the long corridor. The investigator gathered his papers, closed the file, and nodded to James. "That's all. The case is closed. You're free to go." James stood up and walked slowly toward the door. As it opened, a rush of fresh air swept in. Outside, the sky had cleared after the rain, sunlight filtered through the leaves, scattering golden streaks across the wet cement. The lingering chill of the past days was finally fading. At the gate, Diep was waiting. She wore a thin sweater, an umbrella in hand, her hair tied neatly back. Her face looked tired, but her eyes were still bright. When she saw James step out, she smiled softly, a calm, gentle smile. As if all storms had passed and only peace remained. "So, it's over now, right?" she asked quietly, but clearly enough for him to hear. James looked at her for a long moment. His eyes still carried fatigue, but somewhere deep inside, there was relief, fragile yet real. "Yeah," he replied, his voice raspy, a faint smile touching his lips. "It's over. Now we can finally live in peace." A light breeze brushed past, carrying away the last traces of smoke clinging to his shirt. The two of them walked side by side, silent, down the sunlit path outside the police station. Closing a painful chapter, and stepping into the quiet promise of a new beginning. In the days that followed, life slowly returned to its peaceful rhythm. The warehouse was repaired, the smoke-stained walls repainted, the cement floor still carrying a faint scent of lime mixed with the gentle sweetness of fresh produce. Gone was the acrid smell of burning. In its place came the fragrance of grapefruit, oranges, and newly harvested rice, blending into one soothing aroma, the scent of a new beginning. James and Diep spent their days cleaning up the yard. They pulled weeds, swept fallen leaves, and rebuilt the small wooden fence along the walkway. James built a few new planter boxes, while Diep sowed seeds and watered them every morning. Neither said much, but their quiet togetherness carried a tender calm, as if both were learning how to breathe again after days filled with smoke and anxiety. The grapefruit trees in the garden had begun to bloom. Tiny white petals, delicate as silk, swayed softly in the morning breeze. The gentle fragrance of blossoms drifted through the leaves, mingling with the early sunlight of the new season, a scent so pure it seemed to cleanse the air itself. Every time she passed by, Diep would pause and take a deep breath, a small smile curving on her lips. Each morning, she followed her familiar routine, wearing her old conical hat, a polka dot shirt, sleeves rolled up as she skillfully cut down ripe, golden grapefruits. Sunlight glimmered on her hair, turning it to threads of gold. Little Me toddled around the garden, giggling, holding a tiny basket to help her mother collect fallen leaves and fruits. Her laughter mingled with the rustling of the wind and distant birdsong, making the garden feel as though it had never known sorrow. When the basket was full, Diep carefully arranged the grapefruits onto their small delivery cart. James tied the ropes tight, checked the tires, and stood watching her go, his eyes gentle, filled with a quiet pride. That woman, after everything, still stood strong, like a grapefruit branch that had bent under the rain but never broken. At the market, Diep laid out each grapefruit, polishing them with a soft cloth, smiling warmly as customers stopped to ask the price. The hum of chatter and bargaining mixed with the morning bustle, lightening her heart. The first few bills she earned after the tragedy rested in her hand, not much, but to Diep, they were proof that they had truly risen again. By sunset, she rode home, her hair carrying the scent of sun and smoke from the market, her basket empty but her heart full. In the yard, James and little Nee were watering the new seedlings together. Diep paused, taking in the scene, the thin wisp of kitchen smoke curling up, the sunlight fading behind the trees, and a deep, gentle peace spreading through her chest. It was hard work, yes, but for the first time after all the storms, she understood something simple yet profound. Peace doesn't always come from grand things. Sometimes, it's just in knowing you still have each other, still have a place to return to, and still have the fragrance of the first grapefruit blossoms drifting softly through the wind. As evening settled in, sunlight stretched long across the narrow street, painting the rooftops in a soft golden hue. A cool breeze swept through, carrying the first chill of winter, weaving between rows of trees and window frames, making people instinctively pull their collars higher. Diep and her daughter stopped by the familiar street where winter stalls had just opened, filled with colorful scarves, coats, and knitted hats. The scent of new fabric mingled with the crisp air, familiar, yet strangely comforting. Diep picked out a pale pink wool scarf, soft as clouds. She knelt down and gently wrapped it around little Nee's neck, adjusting each fold with care, as if afraid the cold wind might touch her daughter. "Do you like it?" she asked tenderly. Nee nodded, her cheeks flushed from the cold, a small bright smile blooming like sunlight melting the edge of winter. Diep turned to James, her eyes glimmering under the warm glow of the street lights. "What do you think? This winter feels colder than the last." James smiled softly. He didn't answer right away, instead, he reached out and held her hand. His palm was warm, steady, and firm, enough to make the whole winter seem to fade away in that gentle grip. "It's all right," he murmured, his voice low and calm. "As long as the three of us are together, no cold can reach us." Such simple words, yet they made Diep's throat tighten. All the things they had endured, the fire, the losses, the sleepless nights, suddenly dissolved in that one quiet moment, leaving behind nothing but a peace they had fought so hard to earn. Little Nee looked up, her eyes sparkling with the glow of the streetlights and the fading sunset. She giggled, her voice ringing like a bell in the evening air. "Mommy, it's cold, but I'm not scared when I have you and Daddy." James laughed, gently ruffling her hair, while Diep leaned down to kiss her daughter's forehead. The evening wind was still chilly, yet their hearts felt impossibly warm. Beyond them, the sun sank behind the trees, leaving a rosy sky stretched like a soft blanket over the city. At the front gate, the newly repainted DJ Agriculture sign gleamed under the dusk light, bold, simple, and full of promise. James paused, gazing up at it for a moment before taking Diep's and Nee's hands in his. The three stood together, quietly, in that fleeting instant, as the air cooled, as the light faded. And within their hearts, a small flame burned on, steady, gentle, and full of warmth. A new beginning, peaceful and bright, after all the smoke and storms they had left behind. Everything eventually passes, and what remains are love, faith, and the hands of those who truly care. After the long days of fire, loss, and fear, peace finally found its way back. The first winter breeze drifted through, carrying the faint scent of grapefruit blossoms from the small garden behind the house. A place that had witnessed countless drops of sweat, tears, and all the unspoken words of comfort James and Diep had given each other. Now, everything seemed to quiet down. No more sirens, no more roaring flames, only the sound of little Nee's laughter echoing across the freshly swept yard. The last light of the day glimmered on the DJ Agriculture sign at the gate, shining like a promise that from ashes, they had truly risen again. James gently took Diep's hand, rough but warm. She tilted her head, her eyes shimmering with the reflection of the sunset, and together they smiled. A simple smile, yet carrying within it an entire journey of pain and hope. In that moment, words were no longer needed. Because as long as they still had each other, no matter what tomorrow might bring, they would always have the strength to keep going. Stay tuned for the next episode tomorrow to see what new chapters await in their story. Don't forget to leave a comment to support James and Diep, two souls who walked through storms, rose from the ruins, and found happiness again with their own hands and sincere hearts.
Xin chào tất cả mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình. Hôm nay mình tiếp tục đưa đến với mọi người video tiếp theo về câu chuyện của James và Diệp.